Well, 2020 has certainly been quite a year, with everybody wondering what could possibly come next, but certainly it hasn't been the worst that it could be. I mean, imagine if you got up in the morning and the headlines read that there's a comet hurtling towards Earth that is certain to destroy civilization and life as we know it. And imagine if that wasn't just some idle speculation of a crazy person, but actually an analysis based on the cutting-edge technology of the day. At very least, such a warning would suddenly throw us into perspective at what would then appear to be the rather trivial concerns that we face so far. Halley's Comet has been orbiting the Sun and periodically passing by Earth probably for the entirety of human civilization. As a matter of fact, many of our viewers probably remember the last time the comet passed in 1986. And for millennia, the periodic passing of the comet was considered to be an omen from the gods. But in 1910, new technology meant a better study of the object than ever before. And it was that new science, that new technology, that then sparked a fear that Halley's Comet would end life on Earth. It is history that deserves to be remembered. It's possible that reports of the comet exist at least as far back as 467 BC, but the first certain reports come from China 2 centuries later. Since then, the comet has been reported and depicted in art many times. In 66 AD, Josephus thought it predicted the fall of Jerusalem. In 1066, the English called it the long-haired star. Actually, the word comet comes from the Greek cometus, which means long-haired. 1066, of course, was the same year that William the Conqueror invaded England, and the comet is depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry. It is a short periodic comet with an orbital period of around 75 to 79 years. Depending on how close it comes to Earth during its passage, it can appear very different to observers on Earth. Of course, people didn't fully understand what the phenomenon was. Aristotle had determined that comets were disturbances within the Earth's atmosphere, a belief that was dominant well into the period of medieval Europe. Using measurements of parallax, Tycho Brahe proved in 1577 that comets had to be further away than the moon, but it was not generally believed that comets orbited the sun. No one thought that the comet appearing every 75 or so years was the same object. Scientific study into the comet began in the 16th century, beginning with the comet's passage in 1531. In 1682, it was viewed by Isaac Newton. In 1687, he published his Principia, which outlined his laws of gravity and motion. Though pivotal, its work on comets was incomplete. Newton's friend, publisher, and fellow scientist Edmund Halley had personally published Principia because the Royal Society had already spent its books budget. Halley published his synopsis of the astronomy of comets in 1705 and argued that the comet sightings of 1456, 1531, 1607, and 1682 were in fact the same comet, and that it would reappear in 1758. He died in 1742, was unable to see his calculations proven true. A trio of French mathematicians determined before its arrival that it would be slightly later than Halley had calculated, thanks to the gravitational effects of Jupiter and Saturn. It was first spotted by self-trained astronomer and farmer Joseph Palach on Christmas Day, 1758, and came to its perihelion on the 13th of March, 1759. Confirmation of the comet's orbit was a significant event. It was the first time that anything other than planets had been proved to orbit the Sun, and it bolstered the reputation of Newtonian physics. The comet was first named after Halley by Nicolas Louis Delisle in 1759. The pronunciation of the name of the comet is actually a matter of some controversy, in that Halley's name was spelled several different ways in his lifetime, and they implied different pronunciations, whether that's Halley or Haley or Hawley. Today, people with the surname Halley tend to prefer the pronunciation that rhymes with the word Bally, but the musician Bill Haley popularized that pronunciation with the name of his band, Bill Haley and the Comets. Dictionary.com notes that most astronomers today recommend the pronunciation Halley, but several people still use the pronunciation Halley's Comet, even though that is almost never used to refer to Edmund Halley. The comet's appearance in 1910 was predicted by scientists, and excitement arose from how new technology would be able to study it. Media and popular attention were focused on the comet well before it was visible to the eye. Comet fever caught on across the world as people prepared to view the possibly once-in-a-lifetime sight. As early as 1908, newspapers began to report on the impending event, and in 1909, one paper reported that if you live until next spring, you're going to witness one of the most magnificent sights the heavens has ever disclosed before your eyes. Telescopes, considerably more powerful than in 1835, were all trained on the sky, hoping to announce the first glimpse of the celestial traveler. Companies began including the comet in their advertising, including Pear's soap, the Ford Model T, train lines, and many others worked the comet into their ads to cash in on the hype. Music and poetry about the comet abounded. Sales of opera glasses, telescopes, and binoculars could barely keep up with demand. Comet mania had its grip on the world. Papers reported faithfully on it throughout the year, and it was first sighted by telescope in September. Scientists calculated that it would become visible to the eye in April 1910. It was a surprise to everyone then when on January 12th a comet appeared in the sky, over 3 months early. This comet was only sighted when it was bright enough to be seen with the naked eye. It was so bright that it could be seen during the day. Newspapers fielded calls asking if this was the expected comet, and the New York Times said, "It is easily outrivals Halley's Comet in popular interest." The so-called Daylight Comet, or Great January Comet of 1910, was perhaps the brightest comet of the 20th century. The appearance of the Daylight Comet only brought more interest in the later and more famous comet. On July 10th, the Harvard Observatory spotted Halley's tail, which could be seen by small telescopes as a faint nebula. This was the first time that Halley's Comet would be photographed, and in fact, long exposure allowed cameras to pick up the comet before eyes could. As the Daylight Comet faded throughout February, report on Halley's Comet increased. The comet was predicted to become visible to the naked eye on April 10th, reach perihelion on the 20th, and remain visible for a month as it rocketed past the planet. Its 25 million kilometer tail shining spectacularly behind it. As it turned out, it was less the comet and more the tail that would become a problem. Spectroscopy, the study of the interaction between matter and electromagnetic radiation, began with Newton's study of prisms and the visible spectrum, although he wasn't the first to study it. By the 1860s, German scientists had figured out that individual elements had their own spectral patterns, and thus by studying the spectrum of an object, you could determine its composition. Halley's Comet was the first comet from which scientists were able to gather spectroscopic data. And by February 8th, they were reporting that they had determined that Halley's Comet's tail included cyanogen, a type of cyanide gas that's extremely deadly. Camille Flammarion, a French astronomer and early science fiction writer, took the news gravely. He concluded that the cyanogen could impregnate the atmosphere and possibly snuff out all life on the planet. The New York Times added in its article, most astronomers did not agree with Flammarion, reporting that the cyanogen was extremely diffuse in the tail, and that even if it did reach the atmosphere, it would either decompose by combustion or be repelled by the planet. But perhaps predictably, it was Flammarion's view that received the most attention, at least in part because the planet was scheduled to orbit through the comet's tail on May 19th. The possibility of apocalypse inspired all kinds of strange behavior. Canny hucksters sold anti-comet pills that promised to protect people from the dangerous gas. A fire insurance company advertised that while scientists didn't think the comet would start fires, you might as well buy some fire insurance, just in case. A suit maker advertised nice suits, saying if you're going to die, don't you want to leave a good-looking corpse? Comet cocktails were sold in New York. Gas masks flew off of shelves. It was reported that you could not find a tank of oxygen that you could purchase in Rome. The comet was accused of affecting the weather, of making people in Indiana sleepier than usual. The blame became so common that the comet was blamed for everything from storms at sea to bad dreams to a melancholy cat. The Pope, however, was reportedly unimpressed. Several important events did happen while the comet was visible in the sky. On April 21st, just one day after Halley's perihelion, famed American author Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, died. Twain had been born only a few weeks after Halley's Comet had appeared in 1835. The year before he died, Twain famously said that I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It's coming against next year, and I expect to go out with it. On May 6th, King Edward VII of England died, and his funeral procession was held on May 20th. His funeral was attended by at least 9 kings and many more royal representatives, the last time so much royalty would gather before World War I. As collision with the tail approached, news around the world began to take on a manic tone. The Tacoma Times reported that Korean officials feared that the comet was an ill omen. Korea's former vice minister thought it was a sign foretelling the downfall of the present imperial dynasty. Perhaps it was. A few months later, Japan annexed Korea. A missionary in China reported that locals feared the comet indicates calamity. Reports of suicides and madness caused by the comet were commonplace. Hoaxes, too, such as the widely reported story of a cult that attempted to sacrifice a virgin in Oklahoma. An article suggested that people could survive the comet by renting a submarine. A French scientist thought the comet could cause an extraordinary deluge of rain. A professor in California was concerned that cyanogen would combine with hydrogen to create hydrocyanic acid. Reporters abounded that if the comet hit the planet Earth, it would blow up like a firecracker, or that the comet would pull up the oceans by their roots. Despite the misinformation and fear, for the most part, people were simply interested in viewing something historic. Scientists assured readers that probably they should be totally unaware of passing through the tail. Comet parties became all the rage from Hawaii to Paris. As the fateful day approached, some reached hysterics. People taped up doors to keep the possible gas out, and it was reported that churches were filled with fearful congregations. Less dramatically, some thought the tail might slightly change the color of the sky for a time, or interfere with compasses or telegraph messages. The tail was scheduled to hit the planet during the night of May 19th. Many millions stayed up across the world to see what would happen, to be present at what could be the end of days. Postcards dated with May 20th declared in various languages that it would be fin du monde. Hotels across the world had roof parties. Flammarion and some other French scientists rented out the Eiffel Tower to observe the comet. The New York Herald reported that miners in Pennsylvania refused to work in the days leading up to the event, and some farmers took down lightning rods so they wouldn't attract anything from the comet. On May 18th, a group of people barricaded themselves in a cave, and a poem in another paper implored the comet that it brush the earth gently with its tail. England saw violent thunderstorms, and Flammarion reported that some observers had certain olfactory experiences. Many watched and saw absolutely nothing. Other than some auroras that some attributed to the comet, there was nothing to see. Scientists had made it clear that the comet itself would not be visible on that night, but despite all the fuss, the Los Angeles Herald could announce that the tail was the veriest approach to nothing, set in the midst of a knot. The Earth passed through the tail without consequence. As with all apocalypses that turn out not to be, the morning brought the opportunity for everyone to laugh and to claim that, of course, they had never feared anything. The New York Times reported that learned sky gazers united in saying, "I told you so." Others danced in the streets. It really shouldn't come as a surprise that the world did not end on May 19th, 1910. That's actually what most scientists predicted would happen, but yet many thousands of people were so concerned that they were convinced to buy things like comet insurance and anti-comet pills and gas masks, just in case. It is ironic that the panic over the comet of 1910 was really based on a better scientific understanding of what comets were and how they worked than we had ever had before. Prior to 1910, Halley's Comet and other comets were pretty much just seen as, well, omens of the gods. But in 1910, we had far more powerful telescopes. We had spectroscopy, and we had a relatively modern scientific understanding. And it's a supreme irony that it was that more reliance on science that somehow convinced us that we could quite possibly not survive what we had already survived so many times before. And yet, despite our fears, survive we did. And that is history that deserves to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.